Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to today's webinar. I'm very excited to have you. My name is Gabriel Soto, and I am a senior director at Edison Research. Today, I will be presenting a report that we're calling the Evolving Year, and it focuses on how trends and new consumers are shaping podcasting's next chapter. We did present this at Podcast Movement over the summer. The findings are still highly relevant and very important for you to see if you hadn't had a chance to see it. And if you're here for a refresher, that's fine as well. We're happy to have you here. Feel free to ask any questions in the chat or Q&A function of your Zoom as we go along. Now, in case you're unfamiliar with Edison Research, we're known for measuring media consumption, and we often get asked to forecast our numbers. Will more people be listening to radio by 2030? What about podcasts? That would be like asking us to tell the future. So we always and respectfully decline. I always like to tell people just ask the toilet paper companies in 2019 how much product they needed to stock shelves the following year. It's impossible to predict the future, but let's be honest, we are all going to try to do it anyway. So why not go into it well equipped with a few indicators that can help us anticipate? And today we're going to be focusing on three. The first, trends. Like when your Apple Watch tells you, I know it's a snowstorm out there, but you need to get up off your chair and start taking some steps. These trends can tell you a lot about the direction of your health. And this one says a lot about the health of the podcast industry. According to our National Share of Year quarterly study, Americans combined for 170 million weekly podcast listening hours 10 years ago. 10 years ago. Today, with more people listening, Americans combine for 773 million hours per week. That's an increase of 355%. Now, this statistic showcases that, yes, more people are adopting podcasts, but consumption, the key word here is consumption in our weekly routines is also on the rise. Now, the second type of indicator is like a high school. This past fall was the first time Gen Alpha entered, the hallways of their high school for the first time, for their first year. And there's no better way to understand, what type of sneakers that student body might rock or the slang they'll use to talk in the next 4 years than by looking at its first year students. For example, my nephew, he has the habit of calling me Unc. For the longest time, I used to say, that's pretty cool. That's short for uncle. I love it when the kids use slang with me because it reminds me of how young I am. Not until my girlfriend this past summer fell asleep listening to Kylie Kelsey's podcast episode about Gen Alpha terms did I realize Unc has another meaning. For those of you that aren't watching the screen, the definition is old, out of touch, displaying outdated behavior. Now, as you can imagine, I didn't sleep well that night when I discovered the definition, but I promise you I'm not going through a midlife crisis just yet. Understanding first years, though, allows us to understand the terms of the future. And we can do the same for podcasts. By looking at consumers who started within the last year, we can get a sense of how this class might impact the medium's future. We'll also see how they differ from long-timers or those who have been listening to podcasts for 5 years or more. For example, there's an 8-year difference in terms of median age between first years and long-timers. Incoming listeners are younger, but you can't rule out Gen X or boomers here. Half of first years may be under the age of 35, but that also means that half of first years are also over the age of 35. That's a healthy sign that the medium appeals to everyone. So again, we'll take a look at trends, first years. We'll come back to our third indicator later on. Our third indicator that will help us understand podcasting's next chapter. Again, we'll come back to that one. Now, much of this data is going to stem from our quarterly research study called Edison Podcast Metrics. It's of weekly podcast consumers, which represent 40% of the American population. And we broke down this report into three stories you all have to hear. The first involves changing behaviors, such as discovery devices that people are using due to many of the ripple effects that we're seeing with the increase in the popularity of video podcasts. The second deals with evolving demographics. And last is a little bit on what consumers think of AI in podcasting. Yes, we are calling it the evolving ear. And if you want access to this report and other insights, just email us with a picture of yourself with this secret hand signal, and we'll be sure to get it to you for free. Now, it does feel like yesterday, time flies, when I got my first iPod. But seeing that they're easier to find in museums nowadays, that's just a reminder that we live in an age of constant disruption. New companies, new tech. When Edison Research started measuring podcast listening in 2006, my colleagues then never would have guessed its future would involve smartphones. And they sure as hell would have said smart TVs. Since 2021, we've seen a percentage of US podcast consumers who say they use a smart TV most often for podcasts go from 1% to 9%, surpassing the smart speaker. As podcasters, many of you who are listening today are disrupting what's on TV in American households throughout the day. And that's partly because we've seen disruption in our own industry. Yes, video has transformed the definition of the word podcast, and its disruption doesn't seem to be slowing down. When we look at first years versus long timers, first years in blue here to the right, 77% of first years who actively watch video podcasts has surpassed the 75% of first years on the left who ever listen to audio only podcasts. If you're not on video yet, first years with this statistic emphasize that it's probably time to start experimenting, at least start experimenting. One of the benefits is discovery. The majority of both groups who listen and watch podcasts say they have started listening to the audio only version after discovering its video version. Video doesn't necessarily eat up audio, it can help. And you can thank one of the biggest disruptors of our generation for that. YouTube grew into the number one service that Americans use most often for podcasts. It surpassed Spotify about a year and a half ago. And that might lead you to think, yeah, YouTube is probably more popular among podcasting's first year class. Interestingly, though, YouTube's share is the same among both groups. The real difference is the lack of first years flocking to Apple Podcasts. When we look a little closer, first years are 9 times more likely than long timers to say they use social media platforms most often: Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram. So you can imagine that's where a lot of the consumption is going instead of Apple Podcasts. Among first years, social media platforms, or the combination of social media platforms, are just as big as those who say they use Apple Podcasts most often. And that's the company that started it all. What that tells us is that you, as a podcaster or anyone in the podcast industry, needs to be prepared for the constant disruption of the industry. So, how can we experiment with video? How can we optimize long form and short form video on social media? And what monetization opportunities lie ahead now that there is a stronger presence of podcasting on TV? When we showed this over the summer, there weren't any signs of a Netflix deal or partnership. Now, since then, we are seeing that podcasts are available on Netflix, podcasts are available on Hulu and other video on demand providers. So, a constant disruption that we're seeing even in just the short 6 months that we've experienced since we published this report. Now, first years, we've been talking a lot about them, but who are they exactly? Let's take a look at some of their demographics. Relative to long timers, first years are far more likely to be women. And for us, we're not surprised by this because we know that some of the most popular shows, some of this year's and last year's breakthrough shows have been female led. Kylie Kelsey, Mel Robbins, Stephanie Sue of Rotten Mango, and others have strong connections to one of the most popular women in the world. Good Hang by Amy Poehler recently won the first ever Golden Globes Best Podcast Award. And whether, these shows brought in more women to podcasts or the female audience helped popularize the shows, probably a combination of both. One thing is for sure, we can anticipate a more balanced gender split for podcast consumers in the future. And perhaps one day, podcast consumers may skew female, just like this year's incoming class. Now, despite being younger, as we saw at the top of this presentation, first years are more likely to be Republican than Democrat. The opposite is true for long timers. This tracks with the number of shows engaging with conservative viewpoints that have climbed the charts in recent years. Think Ben Shapiro, Tucker Carlson, Candace. On another note, ethnic diversity is also part of this picture. 39% of first years identify as Hispanic, Black, Asian, or some other non-white ethnic group, compared with 25% among long timers. The data here suggests consumers will look more like the face of the country in its next chapter. Now, we understand that inclusivity has become a hot political topic in recent years. But when it comes to business making decisions, when it comes to what is good for business, we tell you now that people are going to include themselves anyway. And as an industry, we need to be prepared for the incoming diversity of both people and thought. At the end of the day, podcasting and where it goes is going to come down to you. Well, allow me to explain that statement. So AI has made its way into podcasting. About one quarter of first years and 1 in 5 long timers say they've listened to a podcast that was narrated by an AI voice. Again, these are those who have ever tried a show. It doesn't necessarily mean that they continued with an AI hosted podcast. Think about the things you've tried in the past and stopped after, the first time you did it, like bungee jumping. But I want you to see a sample of what first years and long timers think about AI. Take a look at this video.
I've heard of those. I sometimes listen to audiobooks that are read by AI, but again, it takes something away from it for me because I'm in it for the people that are doing it. And when it's not a real person and I can tell by the inflection of the voice and the lack of emotion in it, I'm like, this is not quite my speed.
I've never heard of that, but if there were any AI podcasts, I won't listen to that because I like bantering. I like witty speakers. I like good conversationalists, and I can't imagine AI being able to do that ever.
I'll be honest, when I type emails for my job and Google will complete a sentence for me, because I do a lot of boilerplate stuff, I don't hate that. That part makes my job easier. But I don't want it to be doing the creative stuff. I don't want it to be doing the stuff that when I don't work, it does that for me. I want to do the stuff that makes the certain day to day stuff easier. Like there's a meme on a thing like, like I want AI to do like the dishes and take out the trash, not my job. I mean that's oversimplification of the idea, but that's kind of where it's going.
You take the humanity out of that particular podcast, and and that's where I think it gets dangerous, isn't it? Not being able to tell anymore, like what's real and what's AI, and I think that's almost taking it a step too far. So trying to turn it into something that's human and confusing people, and I feel like again it goes back to who's executing it, right? So if it's the AI, even if it's the person's voice, if it's a robot projecting someone else's voice and the robot's doing the work, it's taking away the nuance and the creativity and the in the momentness, if that makes sense, that only human beings can sort of provide. Because the awareness that we have versus the AI being like non-aware, and it's scary that the AI is becoming closer to being sentient and aware, and then that line is becoming a lot thinner. So the more we can get away from that happening, I think the better.
So Rich Eisen's one of your favorite podcasts. Let's say you listen to an episode and you really liked it, and later on you came to find out that it was actually an AI version.
He's a
of
robot.
Rich Eisen.
That's it. He rips off the mask one day, and it's nothing but T2 or T3.
Right.
That's it. You're done.
I would be impressed at the level of the technology, but I would also not like it. I would feel like I was robbed of getting to listen to a person, rather than, even though I was convinced it was a person, it still wasn't a person at the end of the day. And even if, there's the thing, like if I never found out, I would have gone on believing that it was a real person, but I would have felt cheated because, I wasn't listening to a human being.
All right. Now, you can expect to see more research on AI from us in the near future this year. This is pretty much touching the surface of what we're going to get into. But the people we spoke with, almost everyone had a similar sentiment. They're willing to accept AI in the development, the brainstorming of a podcast, but not in the execution or the, entity hosting the podcast itself. Now, growing up, I always thought it was going to be Neo that allowed humans to win the war against the machines, but in reality, you are the one. It seems that every company is in a race for who can, spend the most money on AI initiatives, prioritizing AI over some humans in their podcast divisions. But despite recent cuts and layoffs to people in podcasting departments in recent years, it's going to be hard to get rid of you, the human. Podcasting today is creator led. Take a look at some of the shows with the large concentration of first years in their audience at the top here, and then shows with a strong concentration of long timers at the bottom. Notice some of the differences. Shows with a strong presence of first years tend to be shows that have originated from an influencer. There are cases like these among long timers, but take note how brands seem to have more of a presence. You have NPR, iHeartRadio there at the bottom. At the top, strong presence of first timers include influencers such as hosts of The Dumb Blonde, Karma and Chaos, Suburb Talks, the LOL podcast, Nikki and Bree. Now, yes, first timers love brands. We know that as market researchers. But when it comes to podcasting, it appears that first years love people more. You are the final indicator. Your actions from here on out will determine podcasting's future. What happens with TV, what happens with AI, that is up to you. We asked respondents that we interviewed if they had one final message, because we did reveal to them at the end that this video was going to be presented at a conference to podcasters. Here's what they said.
Keep tackling hard subjects, and especially just to use use your voice without the fear of cancellation or any or to speak and not feel stifled.
Just to like be genuine. I think being just, yourself relates more to your audience. I think if you're filtering yourself, like that's not helpful. Um, and yeah, I don't know. I think like that speaks volumes when an audience can connect with the host and with the people they're bringing on their podcast. I really like respect that.
Just to be honest about everything, and try to ask the right questions like you are, like that.
To be real, not use artificial AI. I think people look for real. At least I do. In my generation, we look for real, not artificial. And I know sometimes you can't even really tell the difference, but to me, it's probably more mental. I want it real.
There's nothing I would like to share, but just keep being real. And I love the real information, and it makes me feel like there are human to human interactions, even with the higher ups, when it sometimes feels like there's no interaction with them.
I would say for anyone who's just starting a podcast, please keep going. Like, don't stop, because you never know who's listening. You might have someone who really, really likes it, even though you're maybe have a struggle building a following. For those like few people that you're reaching right now, it's really important to them. And who knows, right? They might be telling people, and it might take them a little while to get other people to listen, but just keep at it, especially if you love it. Like you're doing something good and you're providing something, making a difference in the world. It's an art form. So as a fellow artist who's experienced that in a different format, like just keep going, keep doing your thing, man.
So I thought about their responses a lot. To be real, to be human, to keep going. This past summer, I committed to doing a triathlon in 2026, and one day I'd like to do an Ironman, as you see in this picture. It's a 2 mile swim, over 100 miles of cycling, and then you finish with a marathon. Maybe I am going through a midlife crisis, who knows? Problem was, I didn't know how to swim. I mean, I wasn't going to drown, but my technique over the summer was so bad that I was gassed by after 1 or 2 laps. So I started taking lessons with a coach, and there was nothing more humbling than when the 70-year-old next to you smoked you in practice every day. But there's nothing more human than being imperfect and making mistakes. People, your audience, they want you to be human. Podcasting is hard. You may want to quit in the near future. People will tell you and try to give you criticism, advice. Why do you talk about yourself so much? Do this instead of that. Now, technique, yes, it's very important. Don't get me wrong. But the biggest factor that will determine your success in the future is not how you did something, but if you did it at all, whether or not you decided to show up. So with that, I'll leave you with keep going, show up, and may podcasting live long and prosper. Thank you very much for showing up to this webinar. If you have any questions, we'll keep this rolling. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you drop into the Q&A function of the Zoom dashboard or in the chat function. And if you can't think of a question that you come up with later, feel free to send us an email at info@edisonresearch.com. Thank you very much and have a great rest of your week. Stay warm.